Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So imagine a city so incredibly powerful, its kings literally decorated their palace hallways with the flayed skins of their enemies.
Yeah, just brutal.
Right. An empire that operated, well, basically like a geopolitical meat grinder, just systematically consuming every surrounding nation, stripping them of their wealth, their culture, their dignity for centuries.
Doing it proudly, too.
Exactly. You look at a world-dominating force like that, and you'd think it was just a permanent fixture of reality, like geology, like a mountain range. But today, we're looking at an ancient whistleblower who stood right in the path of that exact meat grinder and essentially said, you have exactly one generation left before you are completely wiped off the map.
And the crazy part is he was absolutely right.
He called it.
He really did. It is, I think it's the ultimate story of the delusion of permanence. And that's really our mission for this deep dive today. We are opening up the ancient biblical book of Nahum.
Which is pretty obscure for a lot of people.
Well, very much so. It's a highly specific, fiercely poetic prophecy, and it's directed entirely against Nineveh, which was the capital city of the mighty Assyrian Empire.
But just to be clear for everyone listening, our goal here is not to just give you like a dusty history lesson about ancient Mesopotamia.
Right. No, we are taking this stack of source material, the historical context, the theological commentaries from guys like Albert Barnes and Matthew Henry, the archaeological records, and we want to extract the practical wisdom from it.
Yeah, taking this ancient text and holding it up as a mirror.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because the dynamics of power, of corruption, and the inevitable collapse of predatory systems that Nahum is describing, those are still completely relevant to how we live, work, and lead today.
Okay, let's start by grounding this a bit, because I think it's really easy to hear ancient empire and just, picture some guys with swords running around in sandals.
Yeah, like a movie set.
Right. But to actually feel the impact of Nahum's message, we have to understand the sheer, terrifying weight of the Assyrian machine. Nineveh wasn't just a big city. Our sources repeatedly refer to it as the hammer of the whole earth. So what did that actually look like on the ground?
Well, on the ground, it looked like systemized, industrialized cruelty.
Wow.
Yeah, the Assyrian Empire didn't just defeat neighboring armies in normal combat. They utilized psychological terror as their primary instrument of foreign policy.
So it wasn't just about winning the battle.
No, not at all. If a city rebelled, the Assyrian army wouldn't just conquer them. They would actually impale the leadership on stakes outside the city walls.
Which is horrifying.
And then they'd deport the entire surviving population, moving them hundreds of miles away just to completely shatter their cultural identity.
Just ripping them from their home.
Exactly. And this is the craziest part, they would brag about it on these massive stone reliefs in their palaces. The cruelty was literally the point.
So it's basically a calculated strategy.
Right. Because if you make an unimaginably horrific example out of one city, the next 10 cities are going to just surrender and send you their gold without you having to fire a single arrow.
It's essentially terrorism codified into imperial law.
That's exactly what it is.
But there's this really fascinating wrinkle in their history, specifically with the prophets of Judah. Because Nahum wasn't actually the first person to call them out. If you look at the history, about 100 years before Nahum even showed up, you had the prophet Jonah.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, and everyone knows the whale story, but the actual point of his mission was Nineveh.
Right. He is sent to Nineveh with a really straightforward warning of imminent destruction. And in what is probably one of the most surprising twists in ancient literature, the city actually listens to him.
Which never happens.
Never. But from the king all the way down to the ordinary citizens, they put on sackcloth, they fast, and they genuinely repent. The destruction is averted.
Because they recognize the moral bankruptcy of their violence, and they hit the brakes.
They did. But obviously, the brakes clearly failed eventually.
Yeah, big time. Because by the time we get to Nahum, a full century has passed. And Nineveh has not only relapsed, they've completely doubled down. Nahum's text refers to it as a bloody city.
And reading the historical backdrop, it seems like they had shifted from just being a cruel military power to an economy entirely reliant on extraction.
Yeah, the sources say it was built entirely on rapine and lies.
Yeah.
And let's actually pause and define that, because rapine isn't exactly a word we throw around every day at the grocery store.
No, it's not. Rapine essentially means the violent seizure of someone else's property. So plunder, extortion. Nahum is describing an empire that produces almost nothing of its own value. It only exists by violently draining the resources of everyone around it. And the arrogance that comes with that kind of unchecked parasitic power is just staggering.
And you see that arrogance embodied in the leaders, right? Like if you look at the historical figures involved during this era, specifically the Assyrian king Sennacherib and his chief cupbearer and spokesman, the Rabshakeh, you just see hubris completely weaponized.
Oh, the Rabshakeh figure. He's fascinating.
He absolutely fascinated me in the research, too. He wasn't just a military commander. He was a master of ancient psychological operations.
Very much so.
There's this incredible, super tense scene detailed in the historical books where he stands outside the walls of Jerusalem to demand their surrender.
It is an absolute masterclass in manipulation. So the Rabshakeh walks right up to the walls, and instead of speaking to the Judean leadership in Aramaic, which was, the diplomatic language of the day, he deliberately shouts his threats in Hebrew.
Wait, he spoke Hebrew just so everyone could understand it?
Exactly. He wants the ordinary citizens who are sitting on the wall to hear every single terrifying word. He completely bypasses the king to directly terrorize the populace.
Man, that is so manipulative.
He mocks their military weakness. He points out that literally no other nation's gods have been able to stop Assyria, and he openly blasphemes the God of Judah. The text describes him as a wicked counselor who imagined evil against the Lord.
So he's actively trying to break their spirit.
Yeah, he essentially says, your God is a delusion, your king is lying to you. Surrender right now, or you are going to eat your own waste during the siege.
That kind of psychological warfare feels incredibly modern to me. I mean, if you strip away the ancient setting, ancient Nineveh operates exactly like a modern, utterly ruthless corporate monopoly.
Oh, absolutely.
The one that just crushes local competition through predatory pricing, exploits its workers relentlessly, monopolizes the entire supply chain, and they just walk around with this profound arrogance, assuming they are entirely too big to fail.
Because they buy the regulators, so they assume they are above the law.
Exactly. But here is the piece of the puzzle I keep getting stuck on. Judah resisting Assyria. It's like a tiny local mom-and-pop hardware store trying to file a global antitrust lawsuit against Amazon.
Right. The scale is just laughable.
You don't just lack the resources. You don't even exist in the same stratosphere of influence. So why would a tiny marginalized nation like Judah even bother resisting, let alone sending out a prophet to publicly declare the doom of the hammer of the whole earth?
That extreme asymmetry is exactly why Nahum's message is so vital. What Nahum is doing here is not political commentary.
Okay.
Because if it were just politics, Judah should just surrender. It's the only logical move. But Nahum is making a profound theological declaration. The core message is that an empire, or like you said, a corporate monopoly, or even a deeply abusive interpersonal relationship, if it's built on blood, extortion, and deception, it inherently carries the seeds of its own destruction.
So they are appealing to a higher court.
Precisely. Judah is resisting because they believe that human power, no matter how immense or how terrifying it looks, is ultimately subject to the moral fabric of the universe. They are saying to Nineveh, you might write the laws of geopolitics, but you do not write the laws of cosmic justice.
And that higher court does not mess around. Because when we transition into Nahum chapter 1, we see exactly how the moral universe responds to this untouchable monopoly of violence.
And it's not a gentle response.
No, it's really not. Nahum introduces a force that makes the Assyrian army look like a joke.
Yeah.
But it also introduces something that makes a lot of modern readers deeply uncomfortable.
Yes. We are talking about the unvarnished wrath of God. And we really need to address this directly because it is a massive obstacle to growth for people engaging with this text today.
It really is.
We live in a 21st century culture that has largely domesticized the divine. We want a purely comforting, passive deity, a sort of cosmic therapist whose only job is to validate our feelings and assure us that everything is fine.
Just unconditional positive regard.
Right. So when Nahum opens with a description of a jealous God, an avenger, and someone who is furious, it feels archaic. It makes us squirm in our seat.
It totally shatters that cosmic therapist mold.
Yeah.
Because the text says, God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth. The Lord revengeth, and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserveth wrath for his enemies.
It's intense language.
Very. And the nature imagery he uses to describe this power is just apocalyptic. It says, his way is in the whirlwind and the storm. The clouds are just the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. And then it lists these specific places. Bashan, Carmel, and the flower of Lebanon languish. Why those specific locations?
So to an ancient listener, Bashan, Carmel, and Lebanon were the ultimate symbols of untouchable, permanent fertility and strength.
Okay.
Bashan was famous for its massive, powerful cattle and towering oak trees. Carmel was renowned for its lush, seemingly endless vineyards. And Lebanon was famous for its massive cedar trees, which were the strongest building material in the ancient world.
So these are like the cornerstones of their natural world.
Exactly. Nahum is saying that the most permanent, powerful, and deeply rooted things on earth literally wither and melt at the presence of divine justice. The earth burns, the mountains quake.
Wow.
And the enemies of this justice. They are likened to tangled thorns and dry stubble. They aren't even a minor speed bump. They are just consumed by an overflowing flood and driven into darkness.
Okay, I see the poetic power of that, definitely. But let me push back a bit on the core concept here.
Sure, go for it.
Isn't it incredibly dangerous to attribute our very human desire for vengeance to divine justice? Like when we get cut off in traffic or when someone wrongs us, we love to secretly think, well, God will judge them. But let's be honest, we're mostly just being petty and vindictive.
Oh, 100%.
So how do the sources separate the wrath Nahum is talking about from just ungoverned human rage? Because when I hear the word jealousy, that is usually a glaring red flag in any human relationship. What does it actually mean that God is jealous?
That distinction is crucial, and the commentators in our source material, Albert Barnes and Matthew Henry, are very careful to pull this apart. Human anger is almost always a loss of control, like you said. It's petty, it's unpredictable, and it's usually rooted in our own ego being bruised.
Right.
God's anger, as described in Nahum, is the exact opposite of a temper tantrum. It is inflexible justice. Barnes notes that God holds this anger at command and under government. It is a calculated, deeply measured, righteous response to systemic evil.
Okay, let me see if I can translate that with an analogy.
Let's hear it.
If I'm walking past a playground and I see a random child being bullied, I might feel a sense of moral disapproval. I might feel bad for the kid, maybe say something. But if I walk past that same playground and I see that it is my child being shoved to the ground and hurt, a completely different reaction takes over.
A very visceral one.
Yes. A fierce, protective rage rises up in me. And that rage isn't because I've suddenly lost my temper or I'm being petty. It's because I fiercely love my child, and I will absolutely not allow them to be destroyed. Is that protective instinct closer to the jealousy Nahum is describing?
That is the perfect analogy. Barnes explicitly refers to God's jealousy as a protective love. It is an intense, unyielding love that absolutely will not tolerate the abuse of what it loves.
That reframes it completely.
It does, because if you claim to truly love the oppressed, which in this historical context is the tiny nation of Judah being slowly crushed by Assyria, you must fiercely and actively oppose the oppressor. You cannot remain neutral.
Because neutrality just helps the bully.
Exactly. Neutrality in the face of Assyrian cruelty isn't peace, it's complicity. So God's fury here isn't a petty outburst. It is the manifestation of his profound love for the victims of Nineveh. It's the moral universe finally standing up and saying, enough.
And what's really fascinating is how Nahum balances that terrifying image, because almost in the exact same breath that he describes this furious avenger melting mountains, he pivots. He says, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him.
It's an incredible duality. To the oppressor, he is the consuming storm. To the oppressed, he is the impenetrable shelter. The text holds both of those realities in perfect tension.
But Nahum doesn't just leave this divine opposition floating in the cosmic theological realm, right? It's not just a philosophical concept. He brings it violently down to earth.
Very violently.
In chapter 2, we move from poetry to the gritty historical reality of an actual siege. We get the anatomy of a collapse.
Yes, the prophet zooms in from the macro level of the universe to the terrifyingly specific micro level of Nineveh's streets. He gives us a front row seat to the unthinkable, the siege of the unbreachable city. Remember, Nineveh had stood as the unconquered center of the world for centuries. It was a marvel of military engineering.
Yet Nahum paints this vivid, chaotic picture of the city's final hours. He describes the attacker approaching. And the sources say this refers to the historical coalition of Medes and Babylonians that finally took the city.
That's right.
Nahum calls this attacker, he that dasheth in pieces.
I love that title, the disperser.
It's so cinematic. And the visual details he includes are striking. He says, the shield of his mighty men is made red. The valiant men are in scarlet. And I read in the sources that this wasn't just a metaphor for blood. They intentionally dyed their shields and wore scarlet tunics.
Exactly. It was a psychological tactic of their own. Wearing scarlet and carrying red shields signified to the defenders on the wall that no quarter would be given.
Oh, wow. So they were sending a message.
A very clear one. There would be no negotiations, no prisoners taken. They were coming for total, uncompromising eradication.
And then Nahum described the absolute panic inside the city. The chariots are described as flashing with steel and raging in the streets. They are rushing back and forth in the broadways, looking like flaming torches, running like lightning. The pine spears are being frantically brandished.
There's absolute chaos.
It's this visceral picture of a heavily fortified, arrogant command center suddenly realizing that their walls aren't going to hold.
And the mechanism of how those walls actually failed is one of the most fascinating historical details in our sources.
I found this part mind-blowing.
It really is. Nahum writes, "The gates of the rivers shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved." Now, for centuries, people read that and just assumed it was poetic license, a metaphor for being overwhelmed by a flood of enemy troops.
But it wasn't a metaphor at all. It was literal hydrology and physics. Let's break down how a river actually breaches a city wall, because I always assumed they just used battering rams or catapults.
Well, you couldn't use standard battering rams on Nineveh. Their walls were supposedly 100 feet high.
100 feet?
Yes, and so thick you could race multiple chariots side by side on top of them.
That's insane.
But Nineveh's defense was built around water. It was situated on the massive river Tigris, and a tributary called the Kausar River ran right through the center of the city. They used these rivers to fill massive moats and control access. Water was their ultimate defense.
So how did it fail?
The historical accounts indicate that the attacking armies essentially weaponized the river against them. During a period of intense rain, the attackers may have dammed the river and then released it, or maybe a natural freak flood occurred. Either way, this massive surge of water hit the foundations of the walls.
Because ancient walls, even massive ones, were largely constructed of sun-baked mud bricks.
Exactly. They were faced with stone, but the core was mud brick. The prolonged exposure to rushing water literally dissolved the foundation. The walls simply collapsed into the mud. The gates of the river were literally opened, and the enemy just poured right in.
It is the ultimate architectural irony. The very thing they engineered to keep the world out became the exact avenue of their destruction.
And then Nahum says, "The palace shall be dissolved." And the sources point out an incredible piece of archaeological confirmation for this.
Yes, the gypsum.
Right. When early archaeologists like Paul Emile Botta and Austin Henry Laird excavated the ruins of Nineveh at Khorsabad in the 1840s, they found the palaces, and they noted that the massive gypsum slabs that lined the interior walls were completely calcined.
Let's explain that. What exactly does that mean?
It's a geological detail that proves the intensity of the destruction. Gypsum is a soft sulfate mineral, and it naturally contains a lot of water locked within its crystalline structure. The Assyrians used massive slabs of it to carve those famous stone reliefs we talked about.
Okay.
To calcine gypsum means to subject it to heat so intense and so prolonged that the water completely vaporizes out of the stone, causing the solid rock to literally crumble into fine powder.
So they didn't just burn some tapestries.
No, you don't get that kind of heat from a quick skirmish. That requires an unimaginable inferno. It was likely caused by the massive, heavy wooden cedar roofs of the palaces catching fire and collapsing in on the stone rooms, burning like a furnace for days.
The destruction was just absolute, and the human toll is described with equal intensity. The queen, who is referred to as Huzab, is led away captive. The text says her maids are moaning like doves, beating their breasts in mourning.
A complete collapse of society.
In this city, which had spent generations hoarding the wealth of the known world, endless silver, gold, and what the text calls pleasant furniture, it is plundered effortlessly. The wealth changes hands in an afternoon.
Poof, gone.
Nineveh is described as a pool of water whose retaining walls have just broken. The people are draining away, fleeing for their lives. The military commanders are screaming, "Stand, stand," trying to rally the troops, but no one even looks back.
Which brings us to the profound core wisdom of this entire section. It is the ultimate reversal of fortune. Nahum mocks the burning city with a really piercing rhetorical question. Where is the dwelling of the lions?
The lions.
We have to understand how deeply the lion motif was embedded in Assyrian psychology. The Assyrian kings constantly compared themselves to lions. If you look at their art, they are always hunting lions, taming lions, or keeping them as pets. They decorated every gateway with massive stone lions.
Because they wanted everyone to know they were the apex predators.
Exactly. On the geopolitical stage, they acted exactly like apex predators, tearing their prey, strangling it, and filling their literal dens with stolen wealth and human captives.
They built an entire national identity on being the top of the food chain. But suddenly, the lions have become the prey. The hunters are being hunted, and their impenetrable den is completely empty.
The enduring wisdom here is that violence and hoarding eventually and inevitably consume the hoarder. If you build your life, your corporation, or your empire entirely on extortion and the suffering of others, you might look powerful for a while. But you are creating a fundamentally fragile ecosystem.
Because it's not sustainable.
Right. An economy of rapine requires constant, exhausting expansion just to maintain itself. It generates endless enemies. And eventually that system will collapse under the weight of its own corruption, and you will become the very prey you used to hunt.
Looking at that absolute devastation, you really have to wonder if this was just bad military strategy on their part, or if it was the inevitable turn of the geopolitical wheel. But reading between the lines of chapter 3, Nahum doesn't frame this as just a standard military defeat. He frames it as a prosecution.
He does.
He shifts from describing the physical fall of the city to laying out the specific charges being brought against it.
Yes. Chapter 3 is the moral indictment. Nineveh is formally charged with being a bloody city. It is completely full of lies and robbery, a place where the prey never departs. They didn't just conquer, they systematically lied, defrauded, and built an entire culture around deception.
And to describe that deception, Nahum uses some very striking and frankly uncomfortable metaphors. He describes the city as a well-favored harlot and a mistress of witchcrafts who sells nations and families through her charms and manipulation.
It's a very aggressive language.
It is, and because of these crimes, God declares, "Behold, I am against thee." And the punishment described is brutally graphic. The text promises to expose her skirts over her face, cast abominable filth on her, and make her a vile gazing stock for all the nations to mock.
Let's exercise some wisdom with discernment right here, because modern readers understandably recoil at this text.
He certainly did.
The imagery of violently stripping a female figure and throwing literal filth on her is deeply disturbing. It is vital to recognize that this language is rooted in the harsh honor and shame culture of the ancient Near East. It also reflects the visceral realities of ancient warfare, where public humiliation was the ultimate weapon. We are not here to blindly endorse the literal violence or the gendered shaming that is a product of its ancient setting, but we cannot just dismiss the text because of it either. We have to extract the underlying truth. What is the mechanism of justice Nahum is actually describing with this metaphor?
Right. If we strip away the ancient cultural packaging, what is the core mechanism? It seems to be about the total destruction of a carefully curated illusion.
Mm-hmm.
When he talks about witchcrafts, I initially pictured like literal magic spells. Potions.
Sure.
But reading the context, he's talking about systemic manipulation.
Exactly. He's talking about a deceptive charm that lures people in only to enslave them. Nineveh operated by presenting a beautiful, well-favored facade. They promised alliances, protection, and mutual prosperity. They offered treaties that looked like a great deal for smaller nations.
But it was a trap.
Completely. It was an illusion of freedom that slowly, methodically put those nations into insurmountable debt and political servitude.
Let's translate that ancient witchcraft into 21st century realities, because we see this exact mechanism everywhere today. It is corporate gaslighting.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the predatory lending company that offers a payday loan with a warm smile, slick marketing, and a firm handshake, knowing full well that the compounding interest rates are mathematically designed to trap that family in generational poverty.
Yes.
It's the massive tech monopoly that rebrands itself around connection and building community, while its actual business model is secretly harvesting your private data, manipulating your purchasing habits, and addicting your children to a screen. It is presenting a beautiful facade to the public while operating a system of absolute extraction behind the scenes.
That is a brilliant translation of the concept. And the enduring truth of Nahum's uncomfortable imagery is that corrupt systems built on false facades will eventually be violently exposed.
They can't hide forever.
No. The ancient threat of lifting the skirts and casting filth is the modern equivalent of the ultimate catastrophic loss of PR. It is the whistleblower moment.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. It is the day the internal documents are leaked to the press, the congressional hearings begin, and the entire world finally sees the ugly, exploitative, bankrupt reality behind the polished corporate logo. God is essentially saying, I will ensure that your true predatory nature is made visible to everyone, and you will become a cautionary tale.
A gazing stock. A warning to everyone else, which perfectly sets up Nahum's next move. Because Nineveh's fatal blind spot was the delusion of permanence. They really thought they were the exception to the rule.
Hubris.
Right. They thought, sure, other empires fall, but we have all the money and all the weapons. We are too big to fail. To shatter that hubris, Nahum points a finger down the map to another supposedly invincible city that had recently been wiped out. He asks Nineveh this chilling question. Art thou better than populous Noammon?
Noammon, historically known to us as Thebes, the ancient glittering capital of Upper Egypt.
And they were huge, right?
If Nineveh thought they were grand, Thebes was the stuff of absolute legend. The sources in our research pack go into incredible detail about the sheer scale of Thebes. It was famously known as the City of 100 Gates.
100 gates?
Yes, and it was surrounded and protected by the massive Nile River, essentially making it a fortress of water. And it wasn't standing alone. It was the seat of the Kushite dynasty, backed by the infinite combined military strength of Egypt, Ethiopia, Put, and Lubim.
The architectural details in the research are staggering. Barnes talks about the monuments at Thebes, places like the Karnak and Luxor temples. We are talking about forests of massive stone pillars, colossal statues of pharaohs that were 60 feet tall, carved from single solid blocks of granite that weighed nearly 900 tons.
It was a marvel.
It was the center of a world empire for centuries. It looked as permanent as the mountains, and yet Thebes fell.
It fell brutally. And the deepest irony, which Nahum is exploiting here, is that it was actually the Assyrians under King Ashurbanipal who had sacked Thebes just a few decades prior.
Oh, wow. So they did it themselves.
Yes. The sources note that despite all of Thebes' wealth, its massive water defenses, and its endless coalition armies, she was carried away. She went into captivity. Her children were dashed in pieces at the top of the streets, and her honorable men, the untouchable elite ruling class, were bound in chains. The conquerors literally cast lots, throwing dice to see who got to keep the Egyptian nobles as slaves.
That is chilling. Nahum is looking Nineveh right in the eye and saying, you destroyed Thebes, yet you think you are somehow immune to the exact same cycle of history. You think your preparations are going to save you.
He tells them their fortresses are going to be like fig trees with first ripe figs. If you just shake the tree a little bit, the figs fall right into the mouth of the eater. The enemy won't even have to work for it.
It's just inevitable gravity at that point.
Their troops, despite all their bravado, have become weak. And then Nahum employs these incredibly specific insect metaphors to describe Nineveh's elite class.
Yeah, let's talk about the bugs. It's a massive downgrade in dignity. He shifts from comparing them to terrifying lions to comparing them to swarming bugs. He says Nineveh has multiplied its merchants above the stars of heaven, but they are like a cankerworm, a locust that spoils the land, eats everything of value, and then just flies away.
And then he targets the leadership directly with another bug metaphor.
Thy crowned are as the locusts, and thy captains as the great grasshoppers, which camp in the hedges in the cold day. But when the sun ariseth, they flee away, and their place is not known where they are.
Such a vivid image.
It is. I actually had to sit and think about the physics of this analogy for a minute. If you've ever seen grasshoppers on a freezing, frosty morning, they're completely dormant. They huddle together in the hedges, totally stiff. They look like a massive, dense swarm, an impressive, unified force. But they aren't actually doing anything. They're just surviving the cold.
Right.
Then the sun comes up, the environment heats up, and poof, they vanish. They scatter in a million directions, and you don't even know where they went.
It is a devastating, razor-sharp critique of mercenary leadership. Nineveh's elite politicians, generals, and merchants were only there for the wealth, the comfort, and the spoils. They enjoyed the status of the empire when things were stagnant and comfortable, but the absolute moment, real heat, real danger, and real sacrifice were required. Their loyalty evaporated entirely.
It's the ancient blueprint for fair weather friends. Or If we look at the modern corporate world, it perfectly describes the mercenary executive class.
Oh, totally.
These are the leaders who are more than happy to huddle up in the boardroom and collect massive bonuses during the cold days when the economy is stable, the company is profitable, and no real leadership is required. But the second the company faces a catastrophic crisis, a massive scandal or bankruptcy, when the sun gets hot, they pull the ripcord on their multi-million-dollar golden parachutes and vanish.
They leave the actual workers, the citizens of the city, to deal with the siege and the fallout. It's a phenomenon we see across all of human history. If we look for comparative insight, this perfectly mirrors the concept of hubris bringing nemesis in Greek tragedy, or the concept of karma in Eastern traditions. It is the universal, inescapable story of empires and monopolies. When you build wealth and power without justice, without mutual care, and without genuine investment in your people, you create a hollow center.
Just a shell.
You build an organization held together only by greed, and when the crisis comes, there's no shared sacrifice, no loyalty to hold that center together. It just dissipates like locusts in the sun.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground here. We've looked at the macro level of ancient geopolitics, the hydrology of siege warfare, and the mechanics of modern corporate monopolies. But we promised at the beginning to bring this ancient text directly into the listener's daily life.
And we must.
Because it is incredibly easy to point the finger at a corrupt CEO or a long-dead Assyrian king and feel morally superior. It is much harder to hold Nahum's text up as a mirror for ourselves. How does this apply to us? Let's circle back to Nahum chapter 1, verse 15. It says, "Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace." For the victims of Nineveh's oppression, the fall of the empire isn't a tragedy, it's the ultimate good news.
Exactly. For the people of Judah, the collapse of Assyria meant they could finally breathe. They could return to their lives, keep their solemn feasts, and perform their vows without the constant, paralyzing fear of the wicked one passing through their land to take everything they had.
It's pure liberation.
Yes, and contrast that sigh of relief with the final state of Nineveh in chapter 3, verse 19. Nahum says, "There is no healing of thy bruise. All that hear the bruit of thee shall clap the hands over thee." And a bruit just means a rumor or a report. When the news of Nineveh's fall spreads, no one mourns. The entire world claps their hands in celebration.
That's a sobering thought. So here is the practical how-to for you listening right now. I want you to ask yourself a hard, uncomfortable question. Where are you building a mini Nineveh in your own life?
That is a piercing reflection. We really need to look at our own ambitions. Are we gathering prey for our dens at the expense of our colleagues, our friends, or our family? Are we stepping on others, claiming credit for their work, or manipulating situations just to climb the ladder a little faster?
Are we relying on locust relationships? Meaning, are we surrounding ourselves with people who are only there for the status, the wealth, or the good times? Relationships based purely on what you can extract from each other will absolutely fly away when the sun gets hot and you face a real crisis.
The practice here is to aggressively audit your spheres of influence. Look at your personal life, the culture of your family, the way you run your business or your team. Ensure that your personal and professional success is not built on witchcraft, on manipulation, deceit, gaslighting, or using people as disposable stepping stones. Because if it is, Nahum warns us that you are building a fragile structure that will require higher and higher walls to protect it. But it is ultimately doomed to collapse.
You want to build your life on integrity. You want to build something that actually lasts. Something where if you face a crisis or a failure, people rally around you to support you instead of clapping their hands at your downfall. You absolutely do not want to be the person whose bruise has no healing, simply because everyone in your life is just relieved you're finally out of power.
So true. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today. When we look at the modern world, it is incredibly easy to become cynical. We see systemic injustice thriving. We see the modern lions prospering, filling their dens with wealth while the vulnerable suffer, and it often feels like the bad guys are simply winning.
It really does.
But Nahum reminds us that history is a very long game. The final chapter hasn't been written yet. The moral arc of the universe is incredibly long, and sometimes it feels painfully, agonizingly slow. But it is deeply, fundamentally intolerant of cruelty. The lions do not rule forever.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.